July 4, 1863. The sun rises over Pennsylvania farmland, revealing a landscape transformed. Where wheat once grew, 51,000 men now lie dead, wounded, or dying. The battle is over. But for Gettysburg, something else is just beginning. Within hours, local residents emerge to a scene beyond comprehension. But some report something even stranger than the carnage. Shadows moving where no soldiers remain. Voices calling from empty fields. The first ghost stories of Gettysburg begin before the last of the wounded are even removed. Today, more than 160 years later, Gettysburg is known as the most haunted battlefield in America. Thousands come seeking something beyond history. They come looking for proof that some part of those who died here remains. Are they finding it? Or are they finding something else entirely, something that reveals as much about us as it does about the past? To understand why Gettysburg became a ghost story, we must first understand what happened here. This is not just another Civil War battle. Gettysburg represents the single bloodiest 3 days in American military history, a concentration of death and trauma so intense that it fundamentally altered the town, the war, and perhaps reality itself. June 1863. General Robert E. Lee leads 75,000 Confederate soldiers north into Pennsylvania. It's an audacious invasion, designed to take pressure off Virginia, threaten Washington, and perhaps force the North to negotiate peace. General George Meade's 90,000 Union soldiers move to intercept. Neither commander intends to fight at Gettysburg. The battle begins almost by accident when advance units collide on July 1 St. What makes Gettysburg unique isn't just the scale, though that's overwhelming, it's the density. You have 165,000 men converging on about 25 square miles. That's roughly 6,000 human beings per square mile, all trying to kill each other. The entire battle takes place in an area you could walk across in a single day. The concentration of violence is almost impossible to comprehend. Day 1. July 1, 1863. Confederate forces push Union troops through the town itself. Fighting rages house to house, street to street. Civilians hide in cellars while bullets tear through walls. By evening, Union forces have retreated to higher ground south of town, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. 9,000 men are already casualties. The stage is set for 2 more days of unprecedented bloodshed. Day 2. July 2. Lee attacks both Union flanks. At the southern end, soldiers fight for control of Devil's Den, the wheat field, and a rocky hill called Little Round Top. In the wheat field alone, control changes hands 6 times. 4,000 men become casualties in that single 20-acre field. At the northern end, brutal fighting continues at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill as darkness falls. Soldiers fire at muzzle flashes in the dark, often killing their own men by mistake. We need to understand what a Civil War battlefield actually meant experientially. These men are fighting with rifled muskets, accurate to 300 yards, but they're using Napoleonic tactics designed for smoothbore weapons. They're standing in lines, in the open, shooting at other men standing in lines. The noise is deafening. The smoke is so thick you often can't see 10 feet in front of you. The psychological trauma is profound and immediate. Day 3. July 3, Lee makes his final gambit. He orders an assault on the Union center, Cemetery Ridge. 12,000 Confederate soldiers, 3 divisions under Generals Pickett, Pettigrew, and Trimble, will advance across 3/4 of a mile of open ground, uphill, toward fortified Union positions. Before they begin, Confederate artillery opens the largest bombardment ever conducted in North America. For 2 hours, over 150 cannons fire upon the Union line. Around 3 p.m., the bombardment ceases. A strange, sudden silence descends. Then, 12,000 men step out from the tree line and begin to march. Then, 12,000 men step out from the tree line and begin to march. What follows becomes known as Pickett's Charge, though Pickett commanded only one of the 3 divisions. It takes roughly 30 minutes. Of the 12,000 men who advance, roughly half become casualties. The assault fails. The Battle of Gettysburg is over. The Confederacy's last major invasion of the North has been decisively defeated. At the final tally, it's approximately 51,000 casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. That's roughly 1/3 of all the men engaged. For perspective, that's more American casualties than D-Day, than Iwo Jima, than the entire Korean War. And it happened in 3 days, in an area smaller than many modern suburbs, but the numbers, staggering as they are, fail to capture the human reality. 7,000 dead horses decomposing in July heat. Thousands of wounded men lying in the sun, some for 3 days before help arrives. Hasty field hospitals where surgeons amputate limbs in assembly line fashion. Basements filled with severed arms and legs. And everywhere, the smell, so overpowering that people 50 miles away report it carried on the wind. The town of Gettysburg, population 2,400, suddenly must deal with 22,000 wounded men. Every church, every barn, every home becomes a hospital. The town's single physician is joined by hundreds of volunteer doctors and nurses, but the scope of suffering overwhelms all efforts. Some wounded men lie unattended for a week. Burial details work for months. Some bodies are never found. And within days, the first strange reports begin to circulate. Within weeks of the battle, Gettysburg residents begin reporting experiences that defy easy explanation. Elizabeth Thorne, caretaker of Evergreen Cemetery, describes hearing phantom artillery fire on quiet nights. The Hummelbaugh family, whose farm served as a field hospital, reports seeing figures in uniform walking through their barn, then vanishing. These accounts are not widely publicized. They're shared quietly, in private letters, in conversations between neighbors. But they persist. The earliest documented ghost story from Gettysburg dates to 1863, literally months after the battle. A local farmer writes to his brother about seeing campfires on Little Round Top where no one is camping. He investigates and finds nothing. No signs anyone was there. He's disturbed enough to write about it, which tells you something. This wasn't considered entertainment. These were real people reporting real experiences that genuinely unsettled them. The Farnsworth house serves as a microcosm of Gettysburg's haunting. Confederate sharpshooters occupied the attic, firing at Union positions on Cemetery Hill. One sharpshooter was killed by return fire. The house still bears over 100 bullet holes. And for 160 years, people have reported strange occurrences here. Footsteps in empty rooms. The smell of gunpowder with no source. A figure glimpsed in the attic window. Practical people who run businesses have had experiences they can't explain. Hearing someone walking upstairs when they know for certain the building is empty. Guests who know nothing about the history ask who the man in the window was. There was no man. Dozens of photographs taken show anomalies. Shapes. Lights. Something happens in these places that can't be easily dismissed. Today, Gettysburg hosts dozens of ghost tours every night during tourist season. The paranormal has become an industry. But this commercialization obscures an interesting historical reality. The ghost stories predate the tourism. They weren't invented to attract visitors. If anything, early Gettysburg residents tried to suppress ghost stories, fearing they would harm the town's reputation. The stories persisted anyway, growing and evolving over generations. Sachs-covered bridge saw intense fighting during the battle. Confederate forces used it as a crossing point during their retreat. Wounded soldiers were hidden beneath the bridge. Some didn't survive. Local legend holds that if you stand on the bridge at dusk and remain silent, you can hear groaning, the sound of wounded men that never left. Hundreds of visitors have reported hearing these sounds. Recording devices have captured unexplained audio. Is this evidence of the paranormal? Or something else? When we study mass haunting claims, we have to consider several factors. First, there's expectation. If you're told a place is haunted, you're primed to interpret ambiguous stimuli as paranormal. A creaking floorboard becomes a footstep. Wind becomes a voice. Second, there's the power of place. Gettysburg is imbued with historical weight. Visitors arrive emotionally prepared for a profound experience. The question isn't whether people have experiences, clearly they do. The question is what causes those experiences. Devil's Den is perhaps the most photographed location at Gettysburg, and also one of the most controversial. Thousands of visitors have captured images here showing unexplained phenomena, orbs, mists, shadows that seem to have human form. Skeptics point to dust, moisture, camera lens artifacts. Believers see something else. In 1975, a group of Marines on a battlefield tour reported simultaneously seeing a figure in ragged clothing emerge from between the rocks, stare at them for several seconds, then vanish. All 6 Marines filed reports describing the same encounter. Researchers have documented over 500 ghost stories from Gettysburg, and what strikes many is the consistency. People who know nothing about each other report remarkably similar experiences in the same locations. The same figure described at the same spot, years apart, by visitors who've never met. The same sounds. The same smells. Now, you can explain that away, suggestion, coincidence, whatever. But at some point, the cumulative weight of testimony becomes difficult to dismiss entirely. Mary Virginia Ginnai Wade was 20 years old when she died on July 3, 1863. She was baking bread for Union soldiers when a stray bullet pierced 2 doors and struck her in the back. She died instantly, the only civilian killed during the 3-day battle. The house is now a museum, and staff members report regular occurrences they cannot explain. Lights turning on and off. Doors opening by themselves. The inexplicable scent of fresh-baked bread. Museum guides who work in these buildings every day see things they can't account for. One morning, all the chairs in the parlor were arranged in a circle, they're normally left against the walls. No one had been in the building overnight. The security system showed no entry. Tour groups hear heavy footsteps upstairs. They investigate. Nothing. No one there. You work in these buildings long enough, you stop questioning whether something happens. You just accept that it does. Modern ghost hunters have descended on Gettysburg with an arsenal of technology, electromagnetic field detectors, thermal imaging cameras, digital voice recorders designed to capture what they call electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. They claim to have documented evidence of paranormal activity. Scientists remain skeptical, pointing to equipment limitations, environmental factors, and the human tendency to find patterns in random data. But the phenomenon itself, the sheer volume of reported experiences, demands some kind of explanation. We don't need to believe in ghosts to find Gettysburg's haunting stories fascinating and important. These stories tell us how communities process trauma, how we remember the dead, how places become imbued with meaning that transcends simple geography. Whether ghosts exist in some objective sense is almost beside the point. The ghost stories are real cultural phenomena that reveal profound truths about memory, loss, and the human need to maintain connection with the past. They want to feel the presence of the past. They want proof that the sacrifice meant something, that the dead haven't simply vanished into oblivion. In this sense, the ghost stories serve a profound psychological function. We live in a secular age where many people struggle with questions of meaning and mortality. Gettysburg offers something that's in short supply, a connection to something larger than ourselves. The possibility that consciousness persists. That the dead aren't truly gone. Whether or not the ghosts are literally real, the human need that drives people to seek them is absolutely real. We're all trying to understand death. We're all looking for evidence that this isn't all there is, but perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, are the ghosts real, perhaps we should ask, what makes a place haunted? Gettysburg is haunted, not necessarily by literal spirits, but by memory, by meaning, by the weight of 51,000 casualties. The ground itself is different here. It has absorbed blood and bone. It holds stories. Whether those stories manifest as genuine paranormal phenomena or as psychological experiences that feel supernatural, the effect is the same. The past refuses to stay past. As a matter of historical truth, Gettysburg changed America. The men who died here died for something, for union, for freedom, for principles they believed were worth dying for. Their sacrifice demands remembrance. The ghost stories, whatever their origin, ensure that remembrance continues. In that sense, the ghosts serve history. In 1913, on the 50th anniversary of the battle, over 50,000 veterans returned to Gettysburg, former Union and Confederate soldiers, now in their 70s and 80s, coming together for a final reunion. They shook hands across the stone wall where they had once tried to kill each other. They wept together. They forgave. The ghost stories began to change after this reunion. The spirits were no longer described as angry or lost, but as peaceful, watchful. As if they too had found reconciliation. Today, Gettysburg exists in multiple realities simultaneously. It's a national park, carefully maintained and historically accurate. It's a tourist destination, with hotels and restaurants and gift shops. It's a sacred site, where people come to honor the dead. And it's a haunted landscape, where the boundaries between past and present seem uniquely permeable. All of these realities coexist, and all of them are, in their own way, true. So are the ghosts of Gettysburg real? After examining 160 years of reports, after considering the testimony of thousands of witnesses, after weighing the arguments of believers and skeptics alike, the answer remains elusive. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the question itself misses the point. What we know for certain is that people experience something at Gettysburg. Whether that something is paranormal activity, psychological response to a charged environment, or the weight of collective memory made manifest, it's real to those who experience it. Thousands of people don't hallucinate the same phenomena in the same locations by coincidence. Something is happening here, and maybe the real ghost of Gettysburg isn't a literal spirit, but something more profound. It's the persistence of trauma, of sacrifice, of a moment in history so intense that it fundamentally altered the space where it occurred. The battlefield is a kind of scar tissue. And like all scars, it tells a story. Whether you interpret that story through a paranormal lens or a psychological one or a historical one, the story itself is undeniable. Gettysburg matters. It mattered in July 1863, when the fate of the nation hung in the balance. It mattered when Lincoln spoke here for months later. It mattered at every subsequent moment when Americans have grappled with questions of unity, sacrifice, and purpose. And it matters now, as we continue to ask what we owe to those who came before us. How we remember them. Whether they, in some sense, remain. The ghost stories of Gettysburg will continue. New witnesses will add their testimonies to the collection. New technologies will seek evidence of the paranormal. New generations will grapple with the same questions that have haunted this battlefield for 160 years. And that's as it should be. Because to stop telling ghost stories would be to stop remembering. And to stop remembering would be to let the dead truly die. Paranormal researchers who have spent decades studying the ghosts of Gettysburg have heard every theory, every explanation. And many still don't know for certain what's happening here. But they do know this: 51,000 men became casualties in 3 days on this ground. They deserve to be remembered. Whether the ghost stories are literally true or whether they're a form of cultural memory, they serve the same purpose. They keep us connected to the past. They remind us that what happened here matters. And maybe that's the real haunting, the refusal to forget. Abraham Lincoln concluded the Gettysburg Address with a charge to the living: it is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. Perhaps the ghosts of Gettysburg, real or imagined, exist to ensure we never forget that dedication. They are the unquiet dead, refusing to release us from our obligation to remember, to learn, to honor the sacrifice made here. So we return to where we began, a simple question with no simple answer. Are the ghosts of Gettysburg real? Perhaps the more important question is, does it matter? The battlefield is haunted by history, by memory, by the weight of sacrifice, by the persistent human need to maintain connection with those who came before. Whether those hauntings manifest as literal spirits or as profound psychological experiences, they serve the same essential purpose. They remind us that some things, some places, some moments, some sacrifices, transcend time. They remain. At Gettysburg, the past is never truly past. It walks alongside us. It whispers from the woods. It watches from the rocks. And whether that presence is paranormal or purely human, a manifestation of our collective need to remember and honor the dead, it endures. The shadows of Gettysburg will persist as long as we choose to see them. As long as we choose to remember. As the years pass, Gettysburg's ghost stories don't fade, they intensify. Each generation adds new accounts. Veterans returning for reunions report seeing fallen comrades. Tourists capture photographs they can't explain. Local residents continue to experience the unexplainable. And certain locations emerge as persistent hotspots of paranormal activity. Cemetery Ridge, the site where Pickett's charge reached its bloody climax. Here, at a stone wall known simply as the Angle, Confederate soldiers briefly penetrated Union lines in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The fighting here was so intense that afterward, witnesses described the ground as carpeted with bodies. Today, visitors report feeling overwhelming sadness at this spot. Some describe a sensation of being watched. Others report unexplained cold spots, areas where the temperature drops dramatically for no apparent reason. Battlefield guides who have worked at Gettysburg for years see rational, skeptical people suddenly become emotional at the Angle for no reason they can articulate. Visitors take photographs here and immediately notice anomalies. Standing alone at dusk at this location, you feel something. A weight. A presence. Is it psychological? Maybe. But it's remarkably consistent across thousands of visitors from all backgrounds. Little Round Top nearly fell to Confederate forces on July 2nd. If it had, the entire Union line would have been compromised. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 20th Maine Infantry made a desperate bayonet charge that saved the position. The fighting was savage. Today, Little Round Top is one of the most visited sites in the park, and one of the most haunted. Visitors report seeing figures in uniform that disappear when approached. Park rangers regularly receive reports of voices speaking in the woods below the summit, conversations that cease when anyone investigates. Perhaps the most disturbing reports come from Iverson's Pits, a location that isn't heavily promoted by the tourism industry, precisely because the stories are so unsettling. On July 1st, Confederate Brigadier General Alfred Iverson sent his brigade across an open field directly into withering Union fire. Within minutes, hundreds of his men were killed or wounded. Many were buried where they fell, in long trenches still visible today. Visitors to this site report overwhelming feelings of dread. Some become physically ill. Others claim to see spectral soldiers rising from the ground. Iverson's Pits is where skeptics often become believers. Hard-nosed journalists, scientists, military historians, people who scoff at ghost stories, visit and become visibly uncomfortable. There's something about that place that affects people on a visceral level. You can dismiss one person's experience. But when hundreds of people independently report the same sensations in the same spot, that demands attention. But Gettysburg's ghosts aren't confined to the battlefield. The town itself is saturated with stories. The Gettysburg Hotel, operating since 1797, has documented paranormal activity on multiple floors. Room 54 is particularly active. Guests report waking to see a man in uniform standing at the foot of their bed. The Cashtown Inn, where Confederate officers stayed before the battle, has reports spanning decades. The orphanage where children died in a fire in 1903 is said to be haunted by the voice of a headmaster who perished trying to save them. What's interesting historically is how these stories evolve. Early accounts are quite simple: a figure seen, a sound heard. But over time, the stories gain details, backstories, even names. The cultural memory becomes more elaborate. That doesn't necessarily mean the stories are false, it means they're being shaped by the community's need to remember and understand. The ghost stories become another way of preserving history, of keeping the dead present in collective memory. Who are the ghosts of Gettysburg, if they exist? The most common theory among believers is that they're soldiers who died traumatically, perhaps unaware they're dead, continuing to fight a battle that ended 160 years ago. But this raises troubling questions. If ghosts are real, why don't we see them everywhere? Why is Gettysburg so much more active than other battlefields? And why are the reports so consistent across so many witnesses? From a psychological perspective, Gettysburg is a perfect storm for paranormal experiences. You have a location with extraordinary historical significance. You have collective cultural memory that's been reinforced for 160 years. You have emotional preparation. People come here expecting to feel something profound. You have environmental factors, old buildings, electromagnetic fields, low-frequency sound from wind and traffic that can create feelings of unease. All of these factors can create genuine experiences that people interpret as paranormal. The rise of paranormal investigation as a phenomenon has transformed Gettysburg. What was once whispered about is now broadcast on television. Ghost hunting tours run nightly. Investigators arrive with equipment designed to detect something. Electromagnetic fields that might indicate a presence. Temperature fluctuations that might suggest a spirit drawing energy from the environment. The scientific community remains deeply skeptical. There's no theoretical framework for how consciousness could persist after death, no mechanism by which a ghost could affect physical reality. Yet the reports continue. For months after the battle, President Abraham Lincoln came to Gettysburg to dedicate the National Cemetery. His speech lasted 2 minutes. The Gettysburg Address is now considered one of the greatest speeches in American history. Lincoln redefined the war's purpose. It was no longer merely about preserving the Union, but about ensuring that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. He transformed Gettysburg from a battlefield into a symbol. Perhaps he also ensured that the dead here would never be forgotten. Lincoln's speech did something remarkable. It made Gettysburg sacred space. Not in a religious sense necessarily, but in a cultural sense. This ground became consecrated by the blood of those who died here. And sacred spaces are liminal spaces, places where the boundary between past and present, between life and death, becomes permeable. The ghost stories are, in a way, a fulfillment of Lincoln's charge. We literally cannot forget the dead here. They remain present, whether as spirits or as stories. Every year, thousands of reenactors converge on Gettysburg to recreate the battle. They wear authentic uniforms, carry reproduction weapons, sleep in period tents. For some, it's a hobby. For others, it's something deeper, a way of honoring the dead by keeping their memory alive. Some reenactors report profound experiences during these events. A sense of being connected to the soldiers they're portraying. Dreams of battle. A few even claim to channel specific historical figures. When reenactors are out on the field in the middle of a battle recreation, especially at Gettysburg, something happens. The modern world falls away. They're marching over the same ground the original soldiers marched over. They're looking at the same terrain features. And sometimes, not necessarily something supernatural, but sometimes they feel like they understand something they couldn't understand any other way. Like the past is reaching out. Like the fallen want to be remembered. 1 million people visit Gettysburg National Military Park every year. They come to learn history, to honor the dead, to stand where their ancestors fought. But many also come hoping for something else, an experience that transcends the historical.